20 years ago this week, on February 25th, 2001, WWE presented its No Way Out pay-per-view with Triple H beating Stone Cold Steve Austin in a 3 Stages of Hell match. That would have been the perfect setup for a Triple H babyface turn to challenge Steve Austin coming out of WrestleMania that year for the title, but instead, they ended up pairing the two of them off as a team. And The Rock beat Kurt Angle to regain the WWF Championship. It took 2 Rock Bottoms to get the job done because Earl Hebner botched the finish and held up the 3 count on the first one. Even though Angle did not kick out, Angle did not get a shoulder up. That was supposed to be the finish. And Earl Hebner just decided that he saw something that the rest of the world, and apparently the people in the first few rows, did not see. And so he held up the count. Rock was furious. You could see him mouth something to... Now, he had his back turned when he did it, but after he hit the second Rock Bottom on Angle, he mouthed something to Earl Hebner before the 3 count. Kurt Angle has a new podcast with Conrad Thompson called The Kurt Angle Show, and they just talked about this match, in fact. And he said that while he was laying there after the second Rock Bottom, he could hear what Rock said to Earl Hebner. And he told Earl Hebner in no uncertain terms, "Count the motherfucking finish." And Earl obliged. There would be no Las Vegas screwjob on this night. Rock won his title, but he was only a transitional champion to get the belt onto Steve Austin at WrestleMania. Now, just 2 days later, Jerry Lawler's then-wife, Stacey Carter, the cat, Miss Kitty, was released by WWE, and Lawler quit the company in protest. The release came just 2 days after Carter was involved in the Jerry Lawler-Steven Richards match in No Way Out, with the stipulation that if Lawler lost, the cat would have to join the right to censor. But if he won, she would have to get naked. He didn't win. In fact, she inadvertently cost him the match. Lawler, on his website at that time, issued a brief statement, or his webmaster did, maybe it wasn't Lawler himself, but whoever was running his website on his behalf issued a statement on his wife's release. This is what it said. Stacey was released by the WWF this afternoon. In protest, Jerry Lawler has also parted ways with the WWF. The release came as a total surprise without any provocation whatsoever. As for the speculation that was reported on other websites, there wasn't any disagreement involving an angle. The rumor, and I think Pritchard and maybe Jim Ross, I mean, they've because Jim Ross was the head of talent relations at that time, Pritchard was there. The belief, the rap on her was that she was being very difficult to work with. Now, maybe she was, and Lawler just had blinders on because it's the guy's wife. Or that could just as easily be a bullshit explanation from a company that was just looking to get rid of her. But I tend to think there was something there just because they knew it was Lawler's wife, right? They didn't want Lawler to leave. They weren't doing this as a way to get him to quit. So there had to be a really good reason for them to want to get rid of this woman. I don't think they would just get rid of her for the hell of it. Something had to have happened, or she had to have been, giving pushback maybe to the writers. I think there was definitely something going on because they had to know that by doing this could have caused an eruption that they just did not want. And things went exactly the way they were hoping that it wouldn't go. So, a few days after, I think it was about, I don't know how many days, but the two of them issued a joint statement on Lawler's website about their final days with the company. And it is a very lengthy statement. If you look hard enough, you can still find it some places on the internet. Lawler's website's not there anymore. I'm not going to read this whole statement. It's very long. But I did pull some of the key parts just to, some people may not even know that he put this statement out. There's a lot of information in here. This is kind of their side, their version of the build up to this moment and what happened when all of this went down. So this is in Lawler's own words. Stacey has been with the WWF for a little over a year now, and I know I'm a little partial, but I happen to think she is a beautiful and talented young lady. She always seemed to be received well by the fans and gave the wrestling world one of its most memorable moments when she showed the world her puppies at Armageddon. Subsequently, she didn't refuse when WWF officials asked her to be stripped topless in a pay-per-view over in the United Kingdom in a cat fight. The cat was always game for just about anything the writers could come up with. But for the past several months, the cat has seldom been used, I should say. She came to every TV, only to find herself in the back, while every other girl on the roster was used in some situation or some angle. It was very frustrating for her and for me. I could not understand why the writers could always seem to come up with something for everybody else to do, but not for Stacy. Finally, I came up with an idea for her to be inducted into the Right to Censor against her will. I presented my idea to all of the writers on the creative staff, verbally and written out. It was a hard sell, with a couple of writers saying they liked the idea and a few who were not too enthusiastic about it. So finally, I went straight to Vince with the idea, and eventually it got put into motion. Once again, I know I'm partial, but I thought the whole right to nudity versus right to censor was going extremely well. It was entertaining. The fans responded to it with enthusiasm. It made for a nice little underneath match at No Way Out. The following night on Raw, I thought Stacy put on her best performance ever, as she showed the pain and anguish of being part of Right to Censor, but she still showed that her spirit was not going to be broken without a fight. Everything was to continue in the angle on SmackDown, which was taped on Tuesday in Tucson. On Tuesday, during the reading of the show, because they have like a reading with the production staff and Vince, even to this day, they have, that happens at every TV taping. During the reading of the show, Vince said that Stacy and Right to Censor, their angle, would continue, with Val Venus volunteering to personally teach the cat to respect the right to censor. The meeting ended at about 2 p.m. and I went over to catering where Stacy was eating lunch. I told her what she was doing on the show and she said, great. At that point, Stacy left to go work out with Trish Stratus at the gym, and I left the building and drove to a local mall. I returned to the arena, and as soon as I walked in, Steve Lombardi said, King, JR wants to see you right away in his office. Funny thing was JR and I dress in the same room at different venues, so JR's office was also our dressing room. I walk in with JR and Bruce Pritchard, and we all sat down. I said, you wanted to see me, JR? And he said, King, this is the hardest thing I have ever had to say. I was totally confused, and I asked him what he meant. He said Vince has decided that he doesn't want to go any further with the cat angle, and subsequently he wants me to give her her release today. I couldn't believe my ears. Why? Did he give you a reason? And JR said Vince said the writers or creative felt Stacy was hard to work with and didn't have the right attitude, and that if she was featured anymore and became any bigger, she would be impossible to control. Well, we can't have that, right? We can't have WWE letting the talent get out of control. We have to control them at all times. I thought this had to be some kind of a joke. I said, when did Vince tell you this? And JR said, as soon as he arrived at 2:30, Vince told me to release Stacy. So sometime between the production meeting ending at 2 p.m., with Vince saying Stacy was being featured on the show, and 2:30 when JR arrived, and the decision was made to fire her, with neither she nor I at the arena at the time, this took place. I was in shock, he said. I said to JR, if someone doesn't like Stacy's attitude, shouldn't you sit down with Stacy and say your attitude is becoming a problem and we need to address it, or there could be serious consequences? And JR said this was Vince's decision, and he was just delivering the unpleasant message. And then Jim Ross asked me if I wanted to be the one to tell Stacy that she was fired, or did I want him to do it? I said, I'll tell her while we're on the way to Memphis. And JR said, well, what do you mean? And I said, this is bullshit, JR. There's no problem with Stacy's attitude. I know that. But if you guys want her gone, then I'm gone too. And JR said, King, I wish you wouldn't do this. I said, what would you do, JR? Okay, what would you do if the shoe were on the other foot and they were firing Jan for no reason? Would you stay? And Jim Ross said, "Probably not." I said, "Well, I'm not either. And you know me well enough to know that I would react this way, and so does Vince. So I can only figure you guys want me to leave too." From there, Stacy and I went to Vince's office, and this is the best part of this. This is why I wanted to read this. So they go to Vince's office. It says Vince was on the phone. He looked up, and he saw me waiting and motioned that he would be with us in a minute. A few minutes later, Vince was off the phone, and Stacy and I sat down in front of him. Stacy spoke first and said, "Vince, what have I done that was so bad that I'm being fired?" And Vince said, "Well, I'm not really sure of all of it. It's more of a talent relations issue." I said, JR said the writers said that there was a problem with Stacy's attitude. If that's the case, why didn't someone tell her or me that there was a problem so it could be addressed before this?" Vince said, "Someone should have." I said, "Well, no one did." And Vince said, "Well, they should have." And I said, "Well, no one did." And Vince said, "Well, that's bad then." And I said, "And I think it's bad that she's being let go without being told that, and so I'm leaving with her. You had to know that I would leave with her." And Vince said, "I hope you wouldn't." And I said, "Well, I've got to." And at that point, Vince just looked at me and he said, "Well, King, I want to thank you for all that you've done for us here and all the hard work that you've put in for the WWF. You've gone above and beyond the call of duty for us here, and I thank you." And with that, he reached out and shook my hand, and I turned, and Stacy and I left his office and left the building. It was all over that quickly. On the way out of the building, I almost expected someone to come up to me and say, "Hey, what a rib." Nobody did. Let me say that I don't really know what is going on, other than I feel there is more to this than meets the eye. I'm not knocking anybody in the WWF. They've been good to me. I just really don't understand the whole scenario. You have told Stacy and I what you think of this situation. Now he's talking about his fans. You've told Stacy and I what you think of this situation. If you would like to tell the creative team what you think, here are some of their email addresses. And he actually listed in this letter, he listed the email addresses for Bruce Pritchard, someone named Jamie Morris, and Brian Gewirtz. And I'm sure they were totally thrilled at having their email addresses splashed across the internet for all the world to see. So, a very noble thing for the king to do, to stand by his wife. But not that I'm implying, Aleister Black not quitting when Zelina Vega got fired is, somehow a poor reflection on him. Every circumstance is different. But I would think that if you're in that situation and your wife is unceremoniously fired, that as the husband, you would stand with your wife and you would say, "This is bullshit. Fuck this. I quit. I'm out of here." So I think the king, his heart was in the right place with that. But when she left him 5 months later, it probably didn't seem like such a wise move. And by November, Lawler was back on WWE television. He got his old spot back. The one WrestleMania that Jerry Lawler missed during his whole run there just so happened to be probably the best WrestleMania top to bottom of all time. 19 years ago this week, on February 23rd, 2002, the era of honor begins with the birth of Ring of Honor. And the promotion's inaugural show took place at the Murphy Rec Center in Philly. Eddie Guerrero, who is little more than a month away from returning to WWE, wrestled on that very first Ring of Honor show in a loss to Super Crazy. The promotion really was born out of ECW going out of business. It was founded by Rob Feinstein, who founded RF Video. So all those RF Video shoots, that was, his doing. And so RF Video would film videos for some of the smaller regional promotions to make up for the loss of income from ECW going under. So he had tried to make a deal with CZW. I guess they rebuffed him or whatever. It didn't work out. And so out of that, he decided to just go ahead and start his own promotion. And Feinstein resigned from Ring of Honor 2 years later in disgrace for reasons that I will not get into here and now. But the company was bought out by Sinclair Broadcast Group in 2011, and it is still around to this very day. And I have a lot of very fond memories of my early experiences as a Ring of Honor fan. I was not watching from the beginning in 2002, but I first started going to live shows in New York in 2006. So 2006, 7, 8, 9, for years, I would go to a lot of the Ring of Honor. Almost every Ring of Honor show that came to the Manhattan Center, I went to. And a few other ones when they left to go to Terminal 5 because the rent was too high at the Manhattan Center. I don't know that I ever had a bad experience at a Ring of Honor show. I mean, some shows were obviously better than others. I kind of compare it to like how I look at the NXT TakeOver shows. I've never seen a bad TakeOver. I've seen some TakeOver shows that are just blow you away type shows, and then others that are just very good. But I can't say I've ever seen a bad one. I don't ever remember going to a bad Ring of Honor show. I always had fun. Some of them were overly long, but I always had a good time. I got to see some great matches with Samoa Joe and Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness and Homicide and that whole crew from back then. Tyler Black, you might know him. So I have a lot of really fond memories of Ring of Honor, and it's good to see them still going today. 18 years ago, on February 23rd, 2003, No Way Out from the Bell Center in Montreal, Stone Cold's return to a WWE ring for the first time since he walked out on the company 8 months earlier in a match against the man who fired him from WCW, Eric Bischoff. And also, the big rematch pitting The Rock against Hulk Hogan, only this time it was Hollywood Rock. My favorite incarnation of The Rock, gone too soon. The outcome was the same as their WrestleMania match, although with The Rock beating Hogan, this time he did so with help from the referee, the debuting Sylvain Grenier. This was a different variation of, I guess, what you would call a Montreal screwjob, in that Hogan got screwed and they were in Montreal. So you call it the Montreal screwjob. Grenier was friends with Pat Patterson, whatever that means. I mean, I guess they were friendly with each other. I don't know how they met. I don't know how they knew each other. But every time Sylvain Grenier would be mentioned or in the newsletters, he's friends with Pat Patterson. And Patterson is the one who got him in. He got him a tryout. They hired him. They put him in the developmental system. He was still in developmental when he got the nod to be the referee for this match. So imagine, this guy is brand new to the wrestling business. He's been, I think, at OVW, probably it would have been, for maybe a few months. And he's in this pay-per-view main event, participating in a Hulk Hogan Rock match as the referee. So that was a big spot for him. It pays to know people in high places. This was Rock's first match since his SummerSlam loss to Brock Lesnar. And it was not nearly as memorable as their first clash at WrestleMania in Toronto. Funny how neither of the Rock-Hogan matches actually took place on U.S. soil. 11 years ago this week, on the 23rd of February in the year 2010, it was the debut episode of a little show called NXT, with Chris Jericho versus Daniel Bryan as the main event. The show featured 8 rookies, paired off with 8 WWE pros competing in a 3-month-long competition for a WWE contract and a World Championship match on pay-per-view. 8 years ago this week, on February 25th, 2013, saw the final battle between John Cena and CM Punk on Monday Night Raw from Dallas, Texas, what I refer to as the Pile Driver match, with the winner challenging The Rock for the WWE title at WrestleMania. All pile drivers have been banned in WWE now for, I'm going to say it's probably around 20 years since that first pile driver ban went into effect. It was somewhere around 2001, somewhere in that range, 2000, 2001. So, regular pile drivers have been banned for a very long time. The only pile drivers that are allowed are tombstones. And that's really only reserved for 2 people, right? That's reserved for Kane and reserved for The Undertaker. So you can imagine Vince McMahon's reaction when he is watching this match in 2013 between two men who are decidedly not Kane or The Undertaker. And in the middle of the match, Punk gives John Cena a pile driver, which was acknowledged as such on commentary. And I think Michael Cole even freaked out. I freaked out. Just seeing a pile driver on WWE television was like an amazing thing. Like, we see them now all the time, like in AEW and other promotions. But because you just don't see it on WWE TV, it kind of means more now. I almost wish they would allow it to come back in like a limited way. But Vince McMahon was livid backstage. And John Cena, who is like the Teflon Don there, nothing sticks to this guy. He can do no wrong. He came to the back. He immediately said, "It's all my fault." Chalked it up to a miscommunication. He tried to take any and all heat off of Punk by taking the bullet for it. Now, whether it was actually his idea, or it was CM Punk's idea, or it was an idea they both came up with together, which is probably very likely, that we don't know. But John Cena took responsibility for it. I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought the match itself was great. The match itself was an excellent match. 7 years ago this week, on February 23rd, 2014, was the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view of the first ever encounter between The Shield and the Wyatt family. They had a "This is awesome" chant before the match even started. Before they even touched, the people were chanting "This is awesome" just from the face-off. Probably the WWE match of the year. Now, I say probably because I'm trying to think. Daniel Bryan actually did not have that many matches that year because he got hurt. I can't think of what else would have been better than this, frankly, in that company that year. Off the top of my head, this probably was the match of the year in WWE in the year 2014. And it's one of my favorite WWE matches, period, of all time. I loved the build-up between the two groups. I love how evenly matched they were in the match. I love how it felt like a fight between two warring factions. I love how the match was booked down the stretch where I think Roman Reigns, he was left all alone. Roman took the losing fall to Bray Wyatt in the end. It was 20 minutes of just pure pro wrestling in its best form. I love that fucking match. They had a rematch on TV. Actually, I think they had two. I think they had a match on Raw maybe a few weeks later, and I think there was a main event match as well. I don't really remember those as much. This is the one I remember the most. This was the first. This was probably the best. This was great. And then the very next day, in 2014, we had the launch of a little something called the WWE Network. This was initially WWE 24/7 On Demand. That was their Classics On Demand service. They ran that for a few years. That was sort of like a dry run or a test run for what would ultimately become the network. I remember I was so frustrated because my cable provider did not carry 24/7. And I love all the classic shit. And I was just so pissed that in New York, I couldn't get it. There were other limited cable systems. I remember, I think it was Rogers or Charter, Blue Ridge Cable, these like random small little rinky-dink in some cases. Not that Rogers is rinky-dink. I'm thinking like Blue Ridge and some of these other ones. They had it and I didn't. I was so frustrated by it. So when they announced plans for a 24-hour network, I was very excited. It was the sort of thing that if I would have had something like this 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I was a younger fan, I never would have left the house. I would have been homeschooled. Are you kidding me? Back when wrestling was really hot, unlike today, if I had a 24-hour WWE or a 24-hour wrestling network to sit home and watch, that would have been amazing. And so this was Vince McMahon's way, I think, of trying to guard against the possibility one day, if he was ever in the same position that he found himself in when he went back to USA, where they didn't have the level of interest in the TV rights for WWE I think that he thought there would be. And they ended up back with USA Network, but they had to take a deal that, was not as good as the one they were looking for. And there was a very real possibility, like for a while there, it was a little scary. When Spike canceled Raw, and they were looking for a new home. And I think this is probably where the genesis of the idea came from. It's like, well, we're never going to be in that position ever again. If anything like that were to ever happen, we're going to have our own network as a safeguard, as a backup. It will never be without a way to get our content out to our fans. Although I think if they ever decided to go ahead and move Raw and SmackDown and everything to the network, it would be a total disaster. You still want to have the the availability and the visibility that you get from being on network television, whether it's Fox or a major cable station like USA. I've heard people say, why don't they just put everything on the network? Why do they even need USA? Why do they even need Fox? And it's just such a foolish, stupid comment to make if you really just stop for 2 seconds and just think. Think about the level of penetration the network has as compared to some of these other networks. Not that on these networks they're getting 5 million people, but if you ever want to grow your base of fans, they have to be able to access your content. If they're not a wrestling fan already and they're not a WWE fan, the likelihood of them paying to buy a WWE network is very, very low. So if you ever hit it big with one of your guys, you do a big celebrity angle, you want to get that curiosity look from a lot of people, hey, or they're flipping channels or whatever it may be, you don't get that. If all of your content is limited to one pay service, you still have to have television. That is as true today as it was when this network was launched 7 years ago. So to answer that question, that's why it would be foolish of them to put everything on the network. But this was really was the start of a brand new era for this company. It was the start of the network era. It was the official slow decline of their pay-per-view business. They were basically cannibalizing their own pay-per-view business by making this move. And it was, just a shift to a totally different era for this company. Now they just made a deal with Peacock for $1 billion to basically sell the entire network to them. They got $1 billion out of it over the next 5 years. And what the future holds for the network is anyone's guess, because what the future holds, I think, for the company is anyone's guess. I still think there's a very good chance that, you look ahead 5-10 years down the road, would Vince McMahon be willing to sell to a Comcast NBC or a Fox, or Disney is probably less likely. But you know what? If he can get a deal worth enough billions of dollars and he thought it was worth it, he was looking to get out, yeah, absolutely. This could be a precursor to some bigger deal happening down the road. 3 days later, the first live special on the WWE Network aired, a little show called NXT TakeOver Arrival, with Paige defeating Emma and Adrian Neville beating Bo Dallas in a ladder match to win the NXT Championship, ending Dallas's 280-day reign as champion, the longest up to that point in NXT history. And finally, on February 22nd, 2016, so we're going back 5 years ago this week, Shane McMahon made his return to Monday Night Raw. He was not on WWE television since 2009. That is when he left the company. A shocking resignation. When he left WWE to pursue interests outside of the company, he was said to be very frustrated with his father, being yelled at by his father and working with his father. I can only imagine what that must have been like. You can understand him wanting to get the hell out of there. So him coming back was a big deal. And we saw him interrupt the Vincent J. McMahon Legacy Award of Excellence Awards ceremony on Raw, where his sister Stephanie was being presented with this award. Shane talked about wanting to take control of Monday Night Raw. He was going against his father, and he wanted to take control of Raw. In order to do so, though, he would have to go through Mr. McMahon. And there was a match announced for WrestleMania, Hell in a Cell. Shane McMahon one-on-one against The Undertaker. Shane would get control of Raw if he won. But they needed a reason. Why would Vince McMahon agree to a stipulation like that in the first place, right? There had to be a reason why. Enter the lockbox. Shane McMahon, when he first came back, I'm sure many of you remember this, you may have forgotten. Shane McMahon announced that he was in possession of a lockbox that had contents inside that his father did not want getting out to the public. And that is what he used as leverage to get this match in the first place, where if he won, he would get control of Raw. Of course, he did not win. Undertaker beat him at WrestleMania. And Vince McMahon later announced that Shane had given him possession of the lockbox, and that was the end of it. We never heard about a lockbox ever again. It was just a device that was created as a means to an end. They had to have something used as leverage in order for Vince to even agree to this match in the first place. And no thought was ever put into that being exposed as far as what the contents of the lockbox might have been. You know, maybe Vince McMahon sired a child out of wedlock. Maybe we had a note in there that told us what the contents were of the briefcase that he walked into the police station with after the whole Jimmy Snuka thing. I would love to know what was in this lockbox. But unfortunately, we never were told, and we never will be, because I'm sure they never intended to tell us in the first place. But that is one of those great unsolved mysteries in WWE history, right? There's been a lot of loose ends over the years creatively. WCW had them too, right? Who was driving the white Hummer? You get these mysteries every now and then. One of the great unsolved mysteries will forever be, what was inside the lockbox? We all have our own ideas. Probably more interesting than what WWE would have come up with anyway. And that is this week in wrestling history.